Good morning, everyone. Thank you that you chose to drink your morning coffee with us. This is our second meeting from the series Morning Coffee and Films. This program complements our virtual Cinema of Eastern Europe. It is a retrospective of the Romanian Film Festival that we offer online together with a few Eastern European film gems. And last week I was telling you about an exciting partnership that we just formed with Bogdan Darev and his original platform, FILMABEE. It is a more interactive and a more personal way to see films. You can he tried to recreate the experience we have in movie theaters, and you can join him on Fridays and on Saturdays at 8:30 p.m. Seattle time to watch a film and then chat with your friends or with whoever is the guest speaker for the Q&A. So we're trying to mimic as much as possible the experiences that were taken away from us by the pandemic. The fact that we used to love getting together to see films together in theaters. Today, our topic will be Radu Jude's Aferim, his film, his masterpiece that got the Golden Bear in 2015 at Berlin, that had its US premiere at the Romanian Film Festival the same year, and also in 2016 was Romania's entry at the Oscars. And our special guests today are Magda Matache. She is a Roma rights activist and scholar, director of the Roma Program at Harvard FXB, and also Cristiana Grigore. She is a research scholar and founder of the Roma Peoples Project at Columbia University, and they will have more opportunities to talk about what they do these days. And also Robert Horton, who is a Seattle-based writer and film critic and a friend of the Romanian Film Festival, and also he wrote a wonderful article about Aferim in the Film Comment. Together we will discuss today about not only about Aferim, but about the importance of films like Aferim as a tool for, to fight for social justice and to bring awareness, to give about the constant fights, even today, against racism and discrimination of all minorities, especially the Roma minority in Romania and in Europe, and we'll talk about it. And I hope that Robert will bring the discussion more to the US. Okay, and my first question to our guest is, what were your first reactions when you saw the film? And for Robert, why did you choose to write about it?
For me, it was one of those things that, can everybody hear me okay? It was one of those things that's kind of funny because it came to me through the editor of Film Comment magazine. And sometimes, being in New York, they get to see a lot of movies before we get to see them in Seattle. And so I think he knew that I was very interested in the Romanian New Wave, and so he saw it sometime before probably anybody else in the U.S. saw it, and just asked me. So it actually came to me in a funny way, and he said, take a look at it, see what you think of it. And when I saw it, I thought it was fantastic. So I really jumped at the chance to write about it then. In terms of why it struck me so much, I think part of it was that the film, it had a kind of, I think I used the word urgency in my film comment piece, and it felt very urgent. And even though I would have no historical background on the subject it was specifically talking about, the way it went about exploring this urgent subject, this political issue or social issue, however you want to say it, seemed to me so original and so unusual. And the fact that it used very, very Black humor to get at something extremely serious, and that eventually very, very violent depiction of its subject, and that kind of very sardonic, very satirical humor went throughout the whole film. I thought was really remarkable, and it's something that I'm really interested in general. Satire. Coincidentally, by the way, when I went to Romania on this Fulbright thing in 2016, I was talking about subjects of American film, but one of them was satire. We did a couple of classes on satire in film, just completely by coincidence. Something I'm really interested in, and I think that's why I was really struck by this film. So many satires, either in film or TV or sketch comedy or whatever. They tend to be sort of toothless or bloodless, and I really like satire that draws blood. And so the more and more you get into Aferim, the more you realize this film is going all the way, and it does. And by the time, of course, when you get to the end of it, you realize it's really not going to hold back anything. And that blend of political commentary and humor, violence, urgency, I think that's what really made me so excited to write about the movie.
Thank you, Robert. Cristiana or Magda, what were your first reactions when you saw the film, and what do you think about the film?
I can start, I guess. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I saw the movie for the first time in New York cinema, and I remember sitting near Norman Mana, a writer who is well known in Romania and US. And I remember we were looking at each other at different scenes, and we're like, "Oh my God!" It was so powerful. The visual is very powerful, and very well done. And the language was quite striking, especially as a Romanian, being able to enjoy the cinematic experience without the translation. It had quite an impact on me. The same as how beautiful. I remember how beautiful the actors were, and it made me think of how little Roma people, when they see themselves many times, their internalized stigma make us not see our beauty and see. So I was very proud of just seeing how well the actors were playing. It was a very powerful experience, and it just gave perspective on a very much forgotten chapter in Romanian history, the Roma slavery, which is not known by most of Romanian, by many Roma ourselves, especially the Roma who hide their identity. And it did have an impact. It did, created started a conversation about it. And it does that up to today. At Columbia University, where I actually just saw a few months ago, just before the pandemic started, there was a discussion started by the movie itself, and I was very happy to see that. These are kind of my first impression. It addressed a very traumatic, very violent part of our history, and it was good to see that and bring it to the forefront of attention in a cinema in New York, and getting the conversation started about that.
Thank you, Cristiana. Excellent. Thank you. Magda, what were your first reactions, and how do you what do you make of the film today?
Well, first of all, good morning, Seattle, and good afternoon, everyone. It's such a great pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Ottilia, for organizing this event and for your anti-racist work throughout the years. I think that more so today than other times is important to conduct anti-racist work. I feel grateful to see Cristo and Victoria joining the conversation. Cristo you've been one of the leaders of the Romani scholarship for years. So I hope we do justice to your work through our comments. But then to get back to your question, Otilia, I watched Aferim today once again because I wanted to have a fresh view on the whole conversation, and I think that I look at the film differently today than I looked at it back home when I watched it in Romania in 2015, I think. And I think that today I kind of place it in a conversation, first of all, with my ancestors, whom I discovered that they were slaves in the village where I grew up, but also in a conversation with the work that we do at Harvard on reparations, especially with the Lancet Commission on Reparations. And third, I put the movie in conversation with the work that Orlando Peterson has done on slavery throughout the world. So there are so many questions in my mind, and I still have to rethink and reformulate some of the ideas in the movie. But to me, what Radu Jude did so powerfully was really to put into image the conflict or the dynamics in the way in which enslavers look at Roma on one hand as property or objects or commodities or things, and at the same time to see them as human beings. And I think that this whole idea of treating Romani people as commodities really transcends to the fact that the enslaver, the buyer, really thinks that, you know, concrete is his property, so he needs his property back. But it's also somehow portrayed to the fact that you have a female enslaver who uses the slave for sexual abuse as it was her property, and she could have done anything with that property. But then you can see that there is a part that, you know, looks at slaves as human beings, all and more so as persons in law. And I say persons in law because they become human beings in the movie as much as in the reality of the 500 years of slavery. They become human beings and people the moment when they have to be punished. So they are human beings in law, they are persons in law because they have to follow the law and be punished, but their humanity does not, it transcends to their, you know, realities. And I do believe that this whole question of Romani humanity is at the core of this movie, and I think it's somehow everywhere. If you look at the language that the movie uses, and you know, the Romanians in the movie refer to Roma, the most often is not gypsies, most often is crows. Mm-hmm. So this idea of dehumanizing slaves has been at the core of oppression for centuries. Dehumanizing oppressed people helps the oppressor to justify their oppression and to justify enslavement. And I think that this has been the case for many instances of state-sponsored injustices, and it was the case of the Roma too. But then there are many questions in the movie. So you see Constantine. So at one point, Constantine really asked the priest, and it's interesting to look at Christianity here and how the values of Christianity really plays in the movie. And Constantine asked, are gypsies humans? And then the priest says, well, actually they are humans, but the Jewish people are not. And I think that that's also like a whole story in itself, to look at the treatment of Jewish Romanians throughout the centuries, and more so during the Holocaust along with the Roma. And then you see Ionita, who actually asks, so why don't we release the slave? He's a soul too. Mm-hmm. And there are many other instances that, you know, we'll talk to the humanity of both sides, but I think that the most powerful image for me in that movie is really the image of the kid. I forgot his name. I think I wrote it somewhere.
Tika, I think.
Yes, I think the image of this kid when he's sold, and you see this buyer looking at his teeth, looking at his weight. It's basically like selling an animal. And this is what the literature shows, that throughout the history of enslavement, Roma were seen little less than humans. They were seen as animals. And I think that that powerful image of selling brings us to the idea of property back. Human beings seen as property, as commodities, and so on. So I think that that's powerful. And perhaps one more aspect of it, and I'll stop here for the moment, is the idea of resistance. Very, rarely we talk about resistance when it comes to enslavement, and more so when it comes to oppression. But then Jude is just fabulous in the way that he, first of all, shows the image of Vera Linguraru, who is a well-known Roma actress, and she's the wife of the slave in the movie, and I think Pena is her name. So Pena revolts in the beginning of the movie, and you see the power of this female Roma. So it's have a powerful Roma woman in that movie that is there for 2 minutes, but those 2 minutes count so much. And I think the other two words that Radu brings in the conversation are the Netoci Roma. So it's Ionita who is in the woods with his father, and he says, what if these are the Netoci Roma? So the translation is the savage Roma in the movie. But I think that what we hear in the literature about this group of Roma is that these are the ones who didn't want to be slaves, so they ran away in the woods. But the literature presents them as being the ones who are savage, as being the ones who are not humans. Their image is even worse than that of slaves. But then you have Ian Hancock, a well-known Romani scholar, who says, well, actually Netoci are true heroes of the Roma because they resisted. And I think that Radu brings that idea, which is very subtle in the movie, but I think it's so important in terms of thinking about, resistance and what resistance and the memorialization of resistance means for reparations and for the stories that we tell to our people.
Yes, right. And I think, Robert, if you can place a little bit the movie into the context of the American cinema. The movie has been compared with 12 Years a Slave, actually. It was considered a Western, but also a mix between classic and modern cinema. Modern because of exactly what Magda and Cristiana said, the way it talks about marginality and the way it talks about the past through a revisionist filter. Because people, and Radu Jude says it himself, he wanted to make this movie to create a link between the past and the present. And I found interesting that in one of the articles, I think in The Guardian, or no, on NPR, the journalist was saying, oh yes, it uses all these well-known codes in American cinema, vulgar language, violence, the way it's filmed, the rhythm, black and white, the choice for black and white is very powerful. But this journalist didn't like the fact that there were not enough close-ups on the characters. And I'm happy to see that Magda and Cristiana think that the characters were powerful enough. But this journalist thinks that there was like a filter. There was not a close up on, Carfin's face, the runaway slave. It's like the audience would have liked to see him more, to grasp who he was more than, and I feel like maybe Radu Jude himself, and he recognizes, he says, he did a lot of research with the writer, with the script writer Florin Lazarescu. We do not have access to this part of the history. It's like it's a missing puzzle of our collective memory, just like with the Jewish Holocaust. And next week we will talk about the Jewish Holocaust with Wana Juju's film Aliyah Dada. It feels like, and Tudor Juju even was saying, we cannot be whole, we cannot function today in the present and rebuild. After 30 years of after the communism, fell, we're still talking about collective memory and what we can do to create a dialogue with these, with the people, the Jewish people, the Roma people in Romania, in order to rebuild together, to hear each other, to hear each other's stories. And I think this movie does a brilliant job with this. Robert, can you talk a little bit about an equivalent in American cinema?
Well, there's so much in what you just said, and I want to address a couple of things, because it's interesting, this idea of whether people get close-ups or whether you get to know the runaway well enough, because I was thinking about some of that, and to me this style of filmmaking, which I think Radu Jude himself said he was at some point he thought, well, it's an American Western. We will use some of those vistas, some of the landscapes that we'll recall an American Western. To me, the fact that we spend so much time in relatively long shots and don't have a lot of close-ups, as this one journalist was saying, is it sort of underscores the way that all of the people in the film are very minor characters who are sort of lost within the overall social status or system, if you can even use that word, as the main character says in the final sequence. What will people think of us 100 years from now? And maybe they won't think of us at all. And that's such an ambiguous statement, because it suggests both the fact that everybody is lost within this distorted system, or that it may have been forgotten on purpose, that it may have been covered up and forgotten for a reason. So I was thinking about that idea of not getting to know people, but I do agree that actually characters do come across very vividly, even though you only see them for a few moments. The revisionist idea, there's definitely a parallel in American cinema, and in particular the westerns of the 1960s and the 1970s are called revisionist westerns because they began to turn the focus on the traditional western to issues of seeing things from the Native American perspective, acknowledging that there was a Native American perspective in the first place, and that atrocities were committed, looking at even if it's just the grunginess of what life would have been like in the West, rather than a sort of cosmetic version. And I really like westerns. There are many interesting westerns before the 1960s, but all of these things were true. The fact that you could no longer distinguish the hero from the villain in an easy way in some of those revisionist films by Sam Peckinpah or Sergio Leone or whatever. Not that Leone's American, but he was inspired by American films. All of that kind of mixed up the thing, and it does go to what Radu Jude said about the past is present, because those films like Aferim were drawing parallels between now and then. And in the 60s, if you went to see Little Big Man or The Wild Bunch or something, you knew that they were talking about Vietnam. They didn't have to say it. It was very clear that along with acknowledging there was a genocide against indigenous people in America, we also want to talk to you about what America is doing right now in other parts of the world. And that's a very noble tradition in revisionist films and satire and so on. And it doesn't surprise me at all that Radu Jude talked about that with his own film very explicitly.
And maybe Magda and Cristiana, now that we're going to the second question, and I think it's the core of our meeting today, of our discussion, what is the impact of films like Aferim? Can we use cinema in order to produce social change? Especially thinking about the fact that Radu Jude is not Roma. How was he perceived, a non-Roma, making this film about Roma slavery?
Should I?
Yes, go ahead, Magda.
Yeah, I think that your question has many answers, because I feel like there are many more questions in one, and I'll try to break it down into pieces. The first part of how it was received, I think that in my case, I first saw Aferim in Bucharest. I was traveling from Boston to Bucharest and watched it in Romania. And I was so surprised to see in the cinema so many ethnic Romanians. It was hopeful, and it was interesting to see that, because most of the times Romanians do not really engage with the past. And Romanians do not really engage with truth-telling when it comes to instances of state-sponsored violence. And I'm not just saying that. I think there is plenty of data to show, for instance, that a study in 2017 showed that half of the Romanian teachers teaching our Romanian children could not form an opinion about Antonescu, the pro-Nazi dictator, who sent to deportation and extermination Jewish Romanians as much as 25,000 Roma. So perhaps in that conversation about what you call Jewish Holocaust, I think it's important to underline that the Holocaust was a shared experience with Romani people and other people as well. So I think that that's an important aspect. But also I think that when it comes to enslavement, there is a internet poll from 2005, because we don't have any national poll conducted recently on it, and what that internet poll shows is that 75% of Romanians did not know about Roma enslavement, and 45% of them didn't even wanted to believe that it happened. So that says so much about where we are in terms of breaking, making a break with the past and trying to engage in truth-telling in the case of the Roma. But I think that Aferim was received well in Romania. And in a way, you can be hopeful about the fact that Romanians are open to actually see a piece of our common history. But at the same time, I do question the reasons why Romanians really went to watch that movie. And I dare to say that the reason was because Aferim has received so many awards and it was so acclaimed internationally that it felt for Romanians that it was okay. It was something that they could have watched as well. And it's not the first instance. For instance, in Romania, we have a well-known artist. His name is Damian Drăghici. He's Romani. And Damian was known in Romania about 15 years after he proved himself in the United States by winning a Grammy Award, by being on stage with well-known American singers and so on. And only after that, Romanians, and I speak about ethnic Romanians, white Romanians, they started to receive him well, because he wasn't just a gypsy singer, musician, former slaves. He was an acclaimed singer in the whole country. So I think we are far from seeing the reality of our past, and I do agree that past is present in so many ways, and we see it in many instances in the way that Romanians treat Roma today. And I think that Jude did a great job. I love the fact that he had two Romani women as actresses in the film. I think it was Mihaela Dergan and Vera Linguraru. I would have loved to see Sorin Sandu as being the main character in the movie. Sorin Sandu is another Romani actor, and I kind of question the reason why the slave wasn't played by a Romani actor, but that's a totally different story. But just one more word about this movie being produced by a non-Roma. And I think that here the question is, what kind of non-Roma are we talking about? Mm-hmm. And if we ought to use Ibram Kendi's framework in Stem from the Beginning, he talks about three categories of people being involved in work on structural racism and structural discrepancies in various areas of life. And he talks about those who are segregationists. So these are those people who are more racist. So their narrative is the fault of Black Americans, is the fault of Romanians for what happens to them today. And then you have a different category that plays the whole conversation in the assimilation framework. So what they say is that, okay, so there is discrimination, but also there is some blame and fault of the Roma because they don't go to school, because they have early marriage, because this and that. So, and you will see that many Roma are in that category too. So I'm not talking only about non-Roma. Roma are in that category too. And then you have a category of anti-racists. And these are the people who tell the truth. And Radu Jude does involve in truth-telling in a very genuine way. And I think that his work in this particular movie is anti-racist work. And I'm talking about his ideas. And I think that in general, when we talk about anti-racists, we have to acknowledge that is work in progress. So it could happen that you do anti-racist work, but you could make a mistake or 10 mistakes and so on. So that's work in progress. And I think that this particular movie is a piece of work that shows that pattern of anti-racist work. And I think that it's important to have Radu in the conversation as much as many other Romanians, because the enslavers were Romanians, so they had an important part. They were the oppressors. They have to acknowledge and to take that as part of their history as much as ours. So I think that yes, Radu Jude has a role, but I also believe that a Roma voice in writing the history of enslavement, in creating artistic work, in being everywhere where we have a conversation about Roma, that conversation has to be with Roma.
Thank you, Magda. Excellent. Cristiana, would you like to add your perspective, please? Unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
The microphone's off.
The microphone is off.
Audio.
Yes.
My stepdaughter just brought me some water. Thank you so much, my dear. Sparkling water, that's great. Thank you. The beauty of working from home. So what I was saying is that I live in US for almost like 11 years. I was not in Romania when it happened, but I did see a lot of reactions on social media and in the news, of course, and also it had quite some visibility in the United States as well, and the words help with that, which is good. I think that the overall feeling I had when it happened was that from the non-Roma side, people were starting to feel seen and acknowledged, like they're part of their history that was acknowledged, and potentially for the first time in their experience. And that's a very powerful symbolic thing, and it helped healing personal trauma, healing family trauma, to start acknowledging, to start having visibility on the stories. On the non-Roma side, from my experience running the Roma Peoples Project for the past 3 years, is that a lot of people just don't know much, which I think tells a lot about the systemic problem, the fact that we inherited this baggage together, Roma and non-Roma, Romanians, Americans, and others. And we have to go through a process to understand it, to unpack it, to discover our own racism, prejudices, biases, and come back on the other side in another way. So at the human level, because part of the work the Roma Peoples Project does is to give a platform to Roma to tell their stories, but also to non-Roma to look at their own stories, look at their own, like we just had an article recently about a non-Roma person who grew up between Canada and Romania, talking about how in her family, she inherited these stereotypes and biases, that she automatically, for example, avoided the areas where non-Roma lived, when Roma lived, sorry, and then started to question, why do I do that? Like, why do I have these fears? So somebody like her she's not racist by definition. We get these prejudices and stereotypes that are automatically like almost like copy paste from the previous generations, and it is a process and it is an effort to look at it, to tackle it, and then you know, some of them even go the extra step to, you know, share their stories. I get quite a lot of messages both from Roma and non-Roma with their reflections, with acknowledging their own you know, blind spots. And I think it's important to recognize that too, that there is progress, that yes, there is a very gloomy and a very difficult issue to deal with. But even the fact that projects like Roma Peoples Project exist at Columbia University, and that we have a platform right now to talk, and like people like me who hide my Roma identity for most of my life, went through the process of sharing it and dealing with it, and having the support of a lot of non-Roma, it's important to look at. So I think movies like Aferim, what they do is they make the issue visible. They start a dialogue. And for people, scholars like me and people who their work is on Roma issues, I cannot emphasize how important that is, because there's so few mainstream projects, whether films or other artistic projects, that draw attention on Roma issues well. And when that happens, people reach out to us, people engage in conversation, and also people offer concrete support. Concrete support meaning volunteering, meaning fundraising, meaning like there is a good impact and a positive constructive impact when a story is done well and it's told. It absolutely directly impact you know, the work we do. As for the non-Roma person telling the Roma story, I think that's okay as long as it's done right. And what I mean by that is engage Roma actors, engage Roma consultants in how the story is told, and make sure they're very thoughtful and sensitive in portraying the story as accurate as possible. Because and also give space for Roma filmmakers and Roma people to share their own stories, create that space for them as well. And I think that is happening more and more. A year ago, I got contacted by a Canadian filmmaker who is working on a movie about Roma in Italy. And she not only wanted to spend quite some time in Roma communities in Italy, understanding the story, but she also wanted to work with Roma consultants, Roma actors. And I think that's a responsible way to be done. So I think there is space for both Roma and non-Roma to cooperate and to start a genuine dialogue about how can we move forward. And my project, Columbia University, is a lot about that, is how do we understand the trauma? How do we heal, and how do we move forward? How do we not let this trauma, which is so well portrayed in the movie, guide our lives and our children's life? I am the mother of a 3-month-old baby, and thinking about him and thinking about what's the responsible way in which the child understands and knows his history, but also not inherit that baggage. So I think, you know, movies like this starts a conversation on what do we do about it and how do we move forward, and how do we move forward together as much as possible. And to speak on I think the power of that, I literally just signed off a session to join this panel, because my project, Columbia University, just launched a festival, a 3-week festival. And today we had like our first event. And we have Romanians and Roma and refugees and human rights activists that come together to discuss an issue that is a societal issue. It's a Romanian issue, it's a Roma issue, but it's also a global issue. So yeah, bringing attention and visibility to a marginalized issue is one incredibly important direct consequence of well-done movies like this one. So. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Cristiana. And I think this is conversation is so interesting, so engaging, and I'm seeing the time. We have 15 minutes, so I'm going to open the floor for questions, because I do want to hear what our viewers have to say, what questions they have for you, and if we have, maybe we can close finish the meeting with a few words about your current work right now. Cristiana talked about Roma Peoples Project at Columbia University, and Magda, maybe you can share what you are working on today. Okay, so if you want to address a question, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Victoria. Magda, I was wondering if you can talk more about reparations and what you mean specifically, and what you were talking about relative to the movie with that.
Yeah, so I think that's the topic for a whole session, perhaps a whole day. But in short, I think that the whole idea of working on this topic of reparations came sometimes in 2015. So Jacqueline Baba at Harvard and I started to develop this project that tries to imagine what reparations would look like in the case of Roma enslavement, but also we joined forces with other scholars like Ian Hancock, who looks at the Holocaust and the reparations that have been done for that. So we've been involved in a large conference that involved Roma, but also Black Americans, Jamaicans, South Africans. So it's a solidarity work that looks at reparations from a global perspective. And as a result of that project, we came up with a volume that will be published this fall, and it looks at reparations for state-sponsored injustices in various parts of the world. So, and we also work on a Lancet report on reparations, which will also be published soon, and that includes a piece on Roma enslavement in Romania and what reparations means. So to me, I mean, there are various frameworks to think about reparations, but I think that in the way that we thought about Roma slavery and the framework of reparations, we thought about 4 categories of measures. One is truth-telling, and that involves more or less acknowledgement and remembrance. And there is a lot to talk about that, because history books still don't talk about that experience. We don't have a museum, we don't have digital archives. Many Romanian Roma do not even know about the history of their own ancestors. And then I think a second framework is really the framework of memorialization. And when we talk of memorialization, we also talk about the memory of resistance. And this is why, to me, it was fascinating that Radu Jude talked about the experience of Netoci Roma. And here, the memorialization of resistance, I also want to bring into discussion the resistance of allies, the resistance of Romanians who involved in anti-slavery work back in the day. So the abolition of slavery in Romania would not have happened without Mihail Cogălnicianu. And I think that we haven't had a Cogălnicianu since then, but this is what anti-racist work looks like. And I think that Cogălnicianu went straight forward on this option. And the third, way of ensuring reparations is apologies. The simple phrase, "we are sorry," has not been said by any of the Romanian presidents, prime ministers, representatives of the Orthodox Church, who also has slaves. So that's a big no, and we've been working for at least 2 decades to make that a reality. And the third and the fourth part is, of course, compensations. And I think this is more, controversial, but I do believe that compensations, financial compensations, have to be a reality, because the wealth of some of the people in my village are the poverty of my family and some of my Romani friends in my own village. So I think that has to happen, and it has to happen through individual compensations, but also through collective, through collective means of reparations. And it's a national conversation that has not happened. We are hoping to to bring that closer to Romania once the Lancet Commission will launch the report, but we will see how that goes. But we think it's important.
Thank you, Magda. Thank you for the question. Any other questions?
I have a question. I'm Iliana Kirila. I'm an assistant professor of French at the University of New Hampshire, and I'm working on Romani literature of French expression. So I'm coming from the other side, let's say. I'm not necessarily very versed in filmmaking, but I do know quite a bit about Romani literature in French. And my question is in fact related to both of them, to literature and filmmaking, because in one of my participation to an international conference, historians in the room have protested against our ideas that literature and movies, filmmaking in this case, can fill the gaps where history is missing. And I would like to hear your opinion. I mean, for myself, I know exactly why I'm saying that, because literature is much more than just a piece of imagination. And it can definitely fill a gap when the gap exists. And in this case, and I think at some point Magda and Cristiana both were making the case of this gap we have in the history of Romani people in Romania, and not only in Romania. So what do you think about this role that filmmaking, and maybe this particular film, Radu Jude's Aferim, can have in filling these gaps that exist, unfortunately?
I can talk. I'll start. Just to me, it's a huge question of how much does a work of art actually forward a cause or an important issue? How can art change the world? And I think it can, but just a thought that it may have to do with the kind of art it is, because I think there are movies that get made on very well-meaning people on important issues, and people go to them and they see a story play out, and it ends with the resolution that you're hoping it does, and it makes you feel good. And there's this thing that happens where that's enough, and then people go back to their lives and they don't think about it anymore. And one of the things that maybe I was touching on at the beginning, talking about Aferim, is that this is the kind of film that it seems to me does not follow that profile at all, and it can make you upset, and it can leave you without the resolution that you were hoping for. Its vulgarity might shock you, and its humor might be bewildering in the very serious subject matter, and so on. And so one part of the answer for me is that I think that kind of art, the art that sort of rips things, tries to open things rather than resolve things, may be pointing in the direction toward art that can actually effect change.
I would just add one more sentence here, and that's that I think that Aferim, as much as The Great Shame that Alina Sherban, the play that Alina Sherban put together years ago, I think they play an important role in opening conversations, national conversations on slavery, and in creating a little bit more awareness in the communities where these pieces of art get to be seen. But the real work has to be done through education, formal education, and has to be done through memorialization and truth-telling.
Can I say something about this subject?
Sure.
I was thinking while you were talking earlier, Magda, and while I was listening to you guys, why are such films made where we take a historical event that apparently informs the present and we want to talk about it? And I think that they're made to reconcile the past to us now. And the question really is, who is it reconciling it for? And I think usually it really is the case that the objective is that the funding and the editing and the voice that makes such films is reconciling that very uncomfortable shame for people in a way that they can take that story and be more comfortable as they leave the theater, as when they're done with the movie. And I didn't watch the whole movie because my attention was taken away to Minneapolis and the rest of the country as I was going through. So I was kind of back and forth, which was an interesting place to watch it from. But I was particularly struck by the shot far back as he breaks down how stereotypes work. And he explains, you know, the logic and the reasoning and the distortion and the showing of that. And I think that was something really specific in this movie that I saw that was really shocking in terms of the question of reconciling and why such films are made.
And I would like to add to that, when we had the Q&A in 2015 for this movie, I left the theater thinking that we have to do more about it. And I'm very happy that we're here today talking about this film, because it is powerful and it needs more dialogue, and it creates a forum. Cristiana, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I want to say something about that. I think that I don't know the reasoning and why behind why the filmmaker choose this particular topic, but I can tell in general, like, why filmmakers choose a particular topic, and it's more practical than choosing a social cause they believe in. Most of the time is because they find a good story and they want to tell that good story, and some of them, they tell it well. And that's fine. It's fine when that happens. The idea is, do they tell that story in a way that it empowers the people they tell the story about, and with, hopefully, or they say it in a way that could exploit and could use that story for their own personal career advancement, their own personal visibility, but without really helping the cause in itself. And I think, regardless of the reasons why a filmmaker choose to tell a story, I think there is a responsibility to give something to the community that story, the topic and the people, the community, the story portrays. Yeah, I'm glad that's part of the narrative and the aftermath of producing this particular movie.
Yes, and we have one more minute, and Magda would like to say something about her program at Harvard. Magda, would you like to add that? And we'll see how you feel. I mean, if you want to stay for two more questions, if the guests have the time, please do. Magda, please go ahead. And
yeah, I'll just have a short intervention because I hope that others will intervene, and I hope to hear Christos' voice and perspective on this. But I think that in terms of the Roma program at Harvard, we started in 2012. It's been 8 years since we've been involved in this program, and I think that our role in the research world is really to fill gaps in Roma-related research, because we acknowledge the fact that there has been so much done that we just want to bring a contribution. So part of our contribution has been really to show that participatory action research, meaning research that comes from communities, with communities, can play a role in academia. And the other part is really to look at state-sponsored injustices at past, and to see how past really, influences present and future. And I think that the approach that we take is a little bit more critical, in a sense that we try to deconstruct also ideas that have been placed in research for so many decades, but only a few people have deconstructed. I think that Christo talks a lot about education in his research, and we try to pick that up and to look at education and to actually question this idea of, well, do Roma really don't want to go to school, or were they rejected from school from the first moment of public school education? And we conclude that is the part with rejection from school. And then the other idea is really the idea of Roma criminality. We hear it so often that we try to look at it. And for instance, perhaps related to the enslavement, we see this instance from the 1600s, where a village in Romania is called Țiganească. Țigan is the equivalent of gypsy in Romanian, and it's called țigănească because the peasants in that village chose to run away from their from the people they were working for, the boyars, and they are called țigănească because the Roma were the ones that were also running away from their enslavers. So this whole idea of gypsy criminality is really rooted in the resistance of Roma against slavery and them running out from enslavers. So it's a lot. We are trying to bring that critical perspective, but more recently what we've done was really to involve with the work of Romanian Americans, Roma in the US, but also perhaps larger in the Americas. And what we see, and I'll finish here, for instance, in the study that we conducted with Romani Americans in the US, what we see is that, for instance, My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, which has been one of the worst portrayals of Romani people in the world, affected so much Romani experiences in the United States. And you will see that children, Romani Americans who go to school in the US, some of them had to drop out. Some of them felt so uncomfortable because of that film. And I think this brings me to some of the the conversations that we had earlier. And it's not that the producers of that film didn't know better. They actually involved in their conversations some well-known Romani scholars from the United States who said this is racist, this is biased, but then they wanted to produce something that was exotic because this is how Americans think about us. So we bring that conversation, and we will launch the report about the situation of Romani Americans sometime in September. So that's exciting, and I'm happy to talk more about it next time.
Thank you, Magda. Thank you for sharing. Do you have other questions, comments? Christo, I think you need to unmute yourself, please. Yeah. No, still no.
Okay.
Yes.
Actually, here is 8:30 in the evening, and good evening, and good morning, and good afternoon to everyone. I haven't seen yet the film. Today, Victoria sent me the film, and I started, but I watched only 10 minutes. And tonight I have watched. This is in my program for tonight. There is something which is very important, and I didn't hear it in the discussion, how the notion, how the term Tsigan, which was given to the Roma in Byzantine Empire from the word tatsinganoi, from the Greek word tatsinganoi, how the meaning of this word changed during the period of slavery. So the word Tsigan in slavery was referred only to those who are slaves. Actually, all those information and knowledge I got from my endless conversations and discussions with Jan Hanko, and that part of the Roma history is not well known in Europe and even among the Roma. And very often when I'm lecturing here and there, especially in front of Roma communities, they cannot accept, and they don't want to accept, that the Roma in Romania, in Vlachia, actually, it was not Romania, it was Romania and Moldova, one country, Vlachia, that the Roma were kept for approximately 460, 465 years in slavery. So I hope, I guess, that the film makes that historical period of the life of the Roma more popular. And I know also from the publications of Nadezhda Demeter, who is another Roma scientist working at the Academy of Sciences in Russia. She did some publications, and she had some publications as ethnographer and historian on that period in Vlachia about the slavery, particularly about the markets, how the Roma women, Roma men, Roma children were sold. And yeah, very sad, very dark side of the Roma history, but it should be known and it should be popularized. And maybe this is something which we as Roma activists, Roma scientists, together with Magda, together with Christina, Victoria, and other colleagues and friends, we have to do, and to bring some more information among ourselves, among not only to the large society, but also to the Roma communities, because as I already mentioned, a lot of Roma don't want to accept it because they have this idea, we are free people, how anyone can keep us as slaves for 460 years. Yeah, it's impossible. But still, thank you very much. I'm sorry I couldn't participate in the discussion because I didn't see the movie. And on the top of everything, a student of mine came because my telephone was stolen, not by the Roma, by a Romanian man in the metro. And I have a new telephone, which I don't understand very well. And one of my students, ex-students, came to help me to solve the problem with the telephone and all these new things. So sorry for that. And I was, going and coming because I had to meet the student and to offer him something to drink. So thank you once more for giving me the possibility to share with you my thoughts about this historical period from the Roma, and definitely tonight I will watch the movie. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe if you have one more question. I see Rose is raising her hand.
I have a question. My name is Rose, and I am the mother through adoption of a child from Moldova. And my husband and I are white Americans, and we were trying to educate him about his own culture. He lived in Moldova till he was 6 or 7. And it's very difficult to know how to do that with sensitivity, but also telling the truth. And I am very curious what your thoughts in general on speaking to him about the problematic history of Romania and Moldova, while also giving him a sense of identity and pride and coming from a place where we are definitely outsiders. So I wonder if you can speak to that and maybe the role of media and films in doing that as well.
I have a concrete recommendation for you.
I would love that.
On June 1st, which is the International Children's Day, we're hosting an event with a Romani writer who writes books for children's, Roma and non-Roma, who lives in UK. So from my point of view, for a child that is so young, the best way to start is by sharing stories, about people's diversity, about expose them to Roma authors. Like, for example, I personally don't know many. I would like to know more, and by all means, like the other Roma scholars and activists here, if you know more Roma writers, especially for children's books, it would be great to know about that and announce it on June 1st. But I think exposing them to stories about Roma people, written by Roma people, ideally, that would be amazing. And to things that are uplifting, like, for example, it could be a story about our diversity. It can be a story about us being multicultural, that living between different countries. It could be a story of resilience and surviving so much hardship and trauma, but in like words that are adequate for such a young child. I would personally not choose to tell that much about the gloomy side of the history that early. He has, or she is a girl or a boy?
He's a boy, and he's 10.
A boy. Okay, 10. It's my stepdaughter is 9. So I think that he has plenty of time to discover all the other parts. And I think starting with uplifting, sweet stories told by the Roma. And I'm happy to share more information about this particular author if you want to check his books.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you.
maybe can you write the name of the author in the chat? And I will
Sure.
send you the information. I will follow up with an email with information about the Roma program at Harvard and the Roma Peoples Program also.
Just one more sentence here. Also, there is a webpage that I think is called Teaching Tolerance, and it talks about the way that we can talk to children about difficult conversations, because I think when you see it on TV and you see it around you, it's hard to to hide that conversation. But also in the Romanian space, very recently, along with other volunteers, we launched a children's book that is called Nanata. It's for younger children, but there is also another book that is called Kendama. And it's a book, is the story of some Romani children, and the author wrote the story based on conversations and work with Romani children in Bucharest. And I'm happy to share those, those pieces of information with you as well.
That would be great. And well, we're 10 minutes past the time. I don't know if you feel like there's one more urgent question. I feel like we need to do a follow-up. I really feel like there's, we had a great moment together, and there's so much more that we can explore together and construct together, build. So please, Magda and Cristiana, tell us more about what you do, and we can share your work on ARC's website, and if you have other events in mind that can bring awareness to your work and can create a forum for dialogue between Roma and non-Roma people, I think please count us in. We will be happy to initiate this kind of project.
I want to mention just two, because they happen, like one of them is tomorrow and one of them is soon. Tomorrow we have an event on the influence of Romani music on jazz, American jazz. So join us if you can. It'll be fantastic to have you there. And then we'll have another discussion on resistance during Holocaust, stories of resistance and strength during Holocaust. And we have a total of like 17 events that brings together Roma and non-Roma, and we hope to see you there. Yeah,
we will definitely include the information on our social media and newsletter for sure.
That's the proactive way to go forward.
Well, yes, thank you. Any last comments? Well,
I have one last comment, because I can't resist, to you, Rose, because I'm a teacher and I work with children. And I think that what I would say to you is that there's a wealth of Roma heroes and figures that you can find around the world. For example, the child with the highest IQ in the world is Roma, or such things like that you can find. And if you can create those stories and have those stories really construct the identity, before you get to an age where you start to understand how injustice functions in the world and how oppression functions, so that there's a solid identity of pride, of intellectual prowess, of resistance, of strategy, of organization, of all these positive things that are really prideful and lift you up and send you out in the world to use your voice. And then when that is developed, to begin to talk about what you can do with such a voice would be my thoughts.
Well, thank you all for participating, and please join us next Saturday. We will talk about Alia Dada and Victoria, about collective memory. It refers to post-communist memory in Bulgaria with Maya Vitkova, and Radu Jude's documentary about the Jewish migration to Israel from Romania. So I hope we can continue this forum, and we'll stay tuned for more details about upcoming discussions. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. Thank you so much for organizing.
Thank you.
Thank you for everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.